So once again, happy Friday, everybody. Good to see you. Let's get started like we normally do. Short period of bell meditation. Wherever you are behind your avatar, get into a nice meditation posture. And as I ring the Ching bell, the idea, focus on the sound of the bell. Get that deep listening going. Get that concentration going so we can all absorb some Dharma today. Chances are you're going to get distracted. It happens to all of us. When it does, I just want you to gently remind yourself and go back to focusing on the sound of the bell. Short meditation, then I'll do the 3 recitations, and then on with the talk for today. So I'll give you a moment, get into a nice meditation posture, and we'll begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dhamma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dhamma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Dhamma. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. All right. So today, excuse me, a little qualifier before I start this one. This is on Dharma and social justice. Now, this is just going to be kind of skimming the top, if you will. Right? So there's going to be parts of this subject that we're just not going to be able to get into today. So what I want to offer is just, like I say, we're just going to skim the top of Buddhism and social justice because it's a very important subject for right now. Because I think people are kind of losing sight of both the social part and the justice part, if you will. So, social justice. This is something that generally arises when individuals and society engage situations or events with a sense of fairness and principled action. Now, you notice we're saying individuals and society. Of course, individuals are part of society, but they're not all of society, right? Like, we're each unique expressions, but we're not unique in. So it's that same idea. Now, a measure of this concept of social justice is revealed in how wealth is distributed, for example, what opportunities are available and to whom, or how privileges that arise in society are able to be accessed. Now, there is an ideal of natural law. Natural law is the idea that everyone, with no exceptions, is treated without prejudice. That is another example of social justice arising. So natural justice or natural law, it kind of has what they call the first precept is seek the good or avoid evil is kind of the idea. Or we could call it do good to others, injure no one, and render to every man. So this is the idea of social justice from a natural justice. Now there's also, there's also social justice viewed as creating equal opportunities for all people. Right? That'd be great. Equal opportunities for all people. The first two things that I mentioned, they're very worthy to pursue. Absolutely. How is wealth distributed? What opportunities are available? We want to pursue those ideas. The last, though, doesn't seem possible if we take it literally. This idea that without exception, everyone is treated the same, that they have equal opportunities. Well, it isn't possible for someone in Peru to have opportunities equal to someone living in Germany. What should be possible, though, is that all Peruvians, for example, have, at the very least, opportunities within their own culture to better themselves and their families. So there should be some kind of path. Right? But we always have to take culture into consideration. The concept of social justice as we look at it now is relatively new. A number of the Enlightenment philosophers, and hey, we got to see the irony in this, right? Enlightenment philosophers of the 17th and 18th centuries, and we're talking about folks like Locke and Kant, they used the term social contract. And the idea of this contract was to grant citizens rights within the broader rights of society and the state. There was an expansion of the range of social justice from just economics to the other aspects of human existence, things like the environment, gender relations, and education, and other causal factors of inequality and injustice in the mid-20th century. The concept of social justice was a much different one in the time and culture of Siddhartha. The Buddha sought equality between castes to seek spiritual and worldly paths. And this has an element of social justice, but just not how we view that concept today. So when I say the Buddha sought equality between the castes to seek spiritual and worldly paths, he wasn't saying by any stretch that the castes should intermingle. What he was saying that within that caste system that they should be able to also seek spiritual and worldly paths. The Buddha did not offer any laws for the guidance of society. You might think, wait a minute, what about King Ashoka? King Ashoka, he was the ruler of the Maurya dynasty from 273 to 232 before the Common Era. And he took the teachings of the Buddha, because the Buddha had been dead before the reign of Ashoka. He took the teachings and he made them a guiding force for ruling his country. And we have a contemporary example, and that's the Kingdom of Thailand. Same idea. Ashoka thought so much of what the Buddha had offered that he had pillars erected across his land, pillars that were carved with the edicts that he expected his people and his government to follow. And these edicts were based in the teachings of the Buddha. But the real focus of the Buddha was the welfare of human beings. That's what he sought to bring focus to. The welfare of individual human beings, and then the human beings as a race, right? He wasn't looking to bring any focus on a particular group or government. We know through our practice and our own experience that there are virtues and morals that are essential to walking the noble path. And we know that these aren't dogmatic laws and they're not some kind of deific command. The Buddha offered actions that one shouldn't do or avoid, but also actions that will cultivate in human beings a compassionate character. And we can only think, we develop each of us a compassionate character, then isn't that going to improve social justice in some way or another? In his meetings with various rulers, the Buddha didn't seek to formulate rules for any one country or peoples, because he realized the effects of the causal conditioning that was brought about by things like their shared geography or their shared culture or their shared history. That he knew that these would be determining causal factors in how they engage social justice in their culture. But he did have a goal. His goal was to get rulers that he spoke to skillfully redescribe the basic virtues and morals that arise in Buddhism as laws or commands that would alleviate suffering and promote human flourishing. He would often remind rulers that the most effective moral path is a middle path of not engaging in any extremes, self-mortification or self-indulgence, for example. And this is Dharma. Always a keen observer of the human condition, the Buddha realized that social justice would arise when the welfare of oneself was experienced as equal to that of others. Does that sound familiar at all? That's loving kindness. This focus on mutual self-interest, this must be the catalyst for any societal restructuring, especially in the West, where individuality is so culturally significant. This too is Dharma. So think about it. If we dealt with each other with more loving kindness, we saw each other as equal to ourselves, wouldn't that also improve social justice in some way, shape, or form? The social ethics that are at the foundation of any type of social justice, these aren't decreed by a ruler or a god. These are the ethics that arise from whatever actions, when decided by consensus with the society, are a benefit to the well-being of a particular social group. In Buddhism, those ethical actions are known as Dhamma. And the actions that are a detriment to or detract from the cohesiveness of a society, they're unwholesome, and they're known as adhamma. And the Buddha discerned that the consequences of an act deemed adhamma had unwholesome causal effects on a society as it did on the individuals. So he's making that connection between the individual and society. In Siddhartha's time, an offender, for example, that had broken some law or rule or whatever, he could be made to confess in public. They might have to ask for, let's call it what it probably was, beg for forgiveness. They would lose rights or privileges. They could lose their property. They could be forced to move to another place. They could endure social ostracizing, banning, and at the top of the list, for the very worst, expulsion from society. There was no mention of physical damage or death for offenders, because the ultimate goal should be to correct unwholesome actions, not to exact some kind of revenge. This is Dharma. Looking through sutras and stuff, trying to find a sutra that might connect us with this idea of social justice and Dharma. I'm thinking about it, and then it just popped into my head. The most glaring example is the tale of Angulimala, the Angulimala Sutra. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. There's also a book called The Buddha and the Terrorist, which is a great book that talks about the tale of Angulimala. But anyway, so the tale of Angulimala is one of individual transformation and of social justice. So the individual and society. The application of justice arises in two ways. There were acts of justice that were dependent on the laws of the state, and the social justice that developed due to the ethics of the society. Laws are set by whatever form of government is active. Social justice arises as actions that are discerned to have that wholesome effect on the group or on society. So Angulimala, he was a robber. He was a terrorist. He was a murderer. He wore a necklace of, it is said, 999 right ring fingers, or pinkies, one or the other, I forget, around his neck. So he was a robber, a terrorist, a murderer. And he had been plying his trade in the forest between Kosala and Savatthi. And walking through the countryside, the Buddha stops at a small village, Savatthi, as a matter of fact. And when he relates that he will walk through the forest to Kosala, the townspeople tell him, "Whoa, man, it's not safe. The murderer Angulimala stalks anybody who goes into that forest." The Buddha and Angulimala do meet in the forest, and the transformation begins in Angulimala. Transformation that continues when the Buddha invites him to join the Sangha as a monk. Angulimala, whose name meant necklace of fingers, does so. He joins the Sangha, and he regains his birth name of Ahimsa, which meant harmless. And he renounces his past of violence, death, and fear. This is kind of social justice from the Buddha's perspective. So in Kosala was King Pasenadi. King Pasenadi comes up in quite a few of the sutras. Well, he ruled this area where Angulimala was perpetrating these horrible crimes, and the people of the surrounding villages, not knowing that Ahimsa or Angulimala had joined the Sangha, they demanded that the king protect them and their livelihoods. Reasonable thing to ask for. The citizens, though, they wanted revenge for their loved ones, and they expected their king to bring Angulimala to justice. The villagers wanted justice dependent on laws that were set down by their ruler, laws that were set down by their government. Well, before setting off with 500 soldiers in search of Angulimala, the king went to the Buddha for advice. And the Buddha asked him a question, quote, "Now, Maharaja, suppose you were to see Angulimala with shaven head and face, wearing a saffron robe, and gone forth into homelessness. Is abstaining from destroying life abstaining from taking what is not given, and abstaining from false speech. That he is eating only one meal a day, and is celibate, virtuous, of good character. If you were to see him like that, what would you do? The king responds, Blessed One, we would salute him. Now I need you to notice, we. He's given that societal we here. Blessed One, we would salute him and rise up to greet him. Invite him to be seated. Invite him to accept robes, alms food, lodging, or medicine, and support for the sick. Or we would provide him with guard, defense, and protection in accordance with the law. But Blessed One, how could one of such immoral character ever act with virtue and restraint? So the Buddha asks a good question. King Pasenadi follows up with another good question. Well, what happens is the king decrees that no punishment will befall Angulimala. Instead, he would be honored as a bhikkhu, and that was the end of it for them. The Buddha goes on to assure the king, you have nothing to fear from Angulimala, a man who had murdered 999 people and terrorized 2 towns for years, faces no legal or social consequences because the Buddha made him a monk. What about social justice? Well, the Buddha's actions here were not connected to any ideal of justice. They were just done to alleviate suffering in individuals. He did not attempt to direct the course of government. Aware that history evolved differently and cultural conditions would differ, he focused on the welfare of human beings, not on their institutions. He realized the depth of anguish, pain, and suffering that Angulimala, the king, and the townspeople of Kosala, Savatthi, and the surrounding villages were experiencing in that moment and set out to alleviate it. The Buddha ordained Angulimala, making him ahimsa again, so that that man could see peace and loving kindness in the present moment, to try to transform him. He took away the king's responsibility to punish Angulimala, to cause suffering, by getting the king to state that if Angulimala was now a bhikkhu, he would be honored. But it was with the townspeople that the Buddha acted most skillfully. The Buddha realized there were 3 hindrances to any social group. Unnatural human desire and craving. We know that one, right? So unnatural human desire and craving will lead to the worst of social ills such as greed, violence, and anger. That was true in the Buddha's time and culture. Hey, it's true in our time and culture too. Hunger, number 2, as an aspect of greed, is a disease of the mind that unchecked will destroy the moral fabric of a social group. So hunger, an aspect of greed. When you get hungry, you get greedy, naturally so. You want food and you want as much of it as you can get. And who can blame you? Decay was the 3rd. Decay, this is an existential part of existence as all things arise and fall away. It hinders social groups that don't respond to decay by making appropriate transformations in relation to the causal conditioning of decay. He realized, the Buddha, that the townspeople were thinking and acting with these hindrances as catalysts. Their desire and hunger for revenge was a sign of impending social decay. And the Buddha sought to stop or slow that decay by engaging the king and the townspeople in a dialogue about their suffering and the suffering of Angulimala. In the story of Angulimala, what happens is the Buddha has those people that Angulimala had wronged in some way, he had them come forward and speak so they could let it go, right? They could let it hopefully fall away, whatever suffering that they were enduring. And in his intent and action, the Buddha was instrumental in developing a sense of social justice in the townspeople. They came to the realization that doing harm in response to harm would do more harm to their social structure. The king and citizens reached a consensus on social justice, one that honored the king, honored the townspeople, honored the transformation of ahimsa and the Dharma. So social justice is a concept, and it means different things to different people. For some, it is social justice to limit hate speech. For others, it is an injustice that needs correcting. So don't limit my hate speech idea. What makes the difference is the action's causal effect on society. The first, when we limit hate speech, that has a wholesome effect. When we don't limit things like hate speech, we get unwholesome effects. Look around. Look at what's going on in the world today, and it is an example. Social justice arises as actions that are discerned to have a wholesome effect on the social group or on society itself. This puts the contemporary ideal of social justice firmly into the Buddhist ideals of intentionally committing acts of selflessness, acceptance, generosity, and loving kindness in order to stand as examples of happiness, health, and harmony for all people. This is social justice and the Dharma. So I speak to you guys a lot about being an example, right? This is how we can bring about transformation, is by being an example. And this is what we're talking about here, is social justice, the kind that we might want to see as Buddhists, will arise from our examples, how we treat people, how we treat ourselves, how we treat others. As long as we are in the world and we're, as it says, committing acts of selflessness and acceptance and generosity and loving kindness, then we're going to be promoting the alleviation of suffering. We're going to be that example. And the Buddha was the best example he could be in his time and culture. Now we have the responsibility to be the best example we can be in our time and culture. There's a lot going on in the world today. There's a lot of social anxiety, and we need to understand that and learn to deal with it. Is it easy? No. Does it have value? Absolutely.